All right, Aerosmith Baptist Church. I am recording today the first of a whole series of videos that I'd like to do called 4H's. And the 4H's that we're going to cover in this video are history, heroes, heartaches, and hopes. And what I would like to do is start to bring people from the church in and get them together with me. And I'm going to do a short little interview. And we're going to cover the 4H's of people's lives. It's a way for me to get to know people, and it's a way for Aerosmith Baptist to feel connected again as a church. You can see each other on video, hear a little bit of each other's stories, and that's just going to be an opportunity for us to connect again. So I'm going to start today by covering my 4H's, my history, my heroes, my heartaches, and my hopes. So I hope you enjoy this segment. So for my 4H's, my first H is history, and history is basically a little bit about my past and where I come from. So I have actually been born and bred in British Columbia. I am a British Columbian through and through, lived here for most of my life with the exception of 5 years that I lived in San Diego, California, where I went to school and finished my graduate studies down there. But my parents are Dutch immigrants from Holland, from the Netherlands. They moved here before the 60s. I was born in 1960, so if you do the math, you can figure out how old I am. And I attended school in the Lower Mainland, grew up in Richmond, and then moved out to the Valley in Matsqui, where my father, both in Richmond and in Matsqui, was working on a farm. So I very much grew up in the farm life and learned a lot of good work ethics and all kinds of things growing up on a farm. And then I went away to school. And when I was in school, I first went down to the States to go to school for one semester. And I took a course in religious studies down there. And it was absolutely my favorite course that I took. And when I came back after one semester, I transferred to Trinity Western University in Langley and decided that's what I want to continue studying. I want to learn more about that stuff just because it really struck a chord in me. And I ended up graduating with a degree in religious studies and then felt like I am going to continue to study this in graduate school. Went on and pursued graduate school at Regent College at University of British Columbia campus. And then I transferred from there to a school down in San Diego. That's how I ended up in San Diego. I finished my Master's of Divinity degree there and really felt called to work in the church. And I did a short stint for a year in the Philippines as a missionary, working with the church in the Philippines. And then I came back and started working with the church here. And I have actually, interestingly enough, spent my entire 27-year career working in the church with one church in White Rock. And from that one church, we planted 3 churches. And then after 27 years, I felt like I was done doing that. And God very much called me into this role to help churches through transitional periods of time. And that's how I ended up doing this. And Port Alberni, actually, here at Aerosmith, is my very first sort of mission in that role as a transitional minister. So that's a little bit of my history, and that's actually how I came here. And it's been absolutely amazing so far to be here, and I've loved it. And I'm looking forward to helping this church find their way forward into the future that God has for them. So my second H for heroes, I'm going to focus on one man in particular, and this takes me back again to San Diego. This was a guy that I worked with at a church in San Diego. I was a associate pastor, and we had lost our senior pastor, and I'd only been there for a couple of months. And then this guy came in actually as the transitional pastor, which is what I'm doing now. And I got to spend the next 2.5 years working side by side with him while this church worked through the process of finding a new pastor. And the amazing thing for me, this man's name was George Fraser, and George Fraser actually poured so much of his life into me. He was an absolute mentor for me. He was a father figure for me and an incredible teacher for me. And he's actually very much the personality that attracted me to the possibility of finally in my life doing transitional ministry myself. I remember one of the things that George would always do is he had this theory of, you watch me do it, and then we'll do it together for a while, and then you do it and I'll watch you do it and sort of coach you. And we did that together for 3 years or 2.5 years, and by the time he was done, he had me doing an awful lot of the work of transitional ministry while he was now watching and coaching me from a distance. The other thing George would always do is every time we went into a meeting, no matter how even difficult that meeting might be, or complex or touchy that meeting might be with a group of people maybe that were hurt or struggling through something, he would always have me there to learn, and he would never fail at some point in time to sort of stop the meeting, turn to me and say, Roger, what do you think? He'd just include me in it and kind of almost throw me into it, and just keep me engaged in that whole learning process and mentoring process that he was working with me. So for me, that's one of the biggest heroes in my life. So my third H is the heartaches. So that's starting to get a little bit more personal, right? And I'm fortunate. I haven't had an awful lot of heartaches in my life, but one that I certainly did experience was, and this goes well back to my youth, my early 20s actually. When I was 21 years old, I had a 19-year-old sister who I was very close to, and she passed away at the age of 19. And my family lost her, I lost her, and I certainly felt and experienced an incredible sense of loss in my life at her passing, and over the years have continued to just feel a void there. And for a big part of my youth growing up from then onwards, heading into adulthood, I really wondered what God was doing and why he allowed something like that to happen. But then at the same time, I also began to realize more and more that it's often those hardest things in our life that we tend to learn the most from too. And to be sure, in the role that I ended up stepping into in life and being a pastor, my being able to walk through a time like that in my life and actually lean on God as an incredible strength in my life during that time was something that I've been able to pass on to a lot of other people and counsel and help and pray them through too. So I saw God work through that as well, that great heartache that was in my life as well. Okay, and my final H is hope. And I think for me, I can look at my whole life lived up to this point and just find so much hope in it. It's like the things that have even not worked out the way I expected or even hoped for them to work out, actually, in hindsight, have worked out in many ways even a lot better than I could have ever hoped for myself. So my hope is in this way that God seems to work things out and bring all things together to this incredible end that make for the purposes in my life all coming together at the right time in ways I could have never planned it myself. And maybe one of the great examples of this is just me being here in Port Alberni. A little over a year ago, this wasn't even a thought in my head anywhere. And yet, even through the COVID season of time and all the craziness that has taken place over the past 10 months, here I am doing something I've found I love to do amongst a whole new group of people that I've gotten to get to know, new family that I feel like I now have. And I've just been my wife and I just so warmly embraced by the people here. And I just find a great deal of hope and just realizing, seeing, and coming more and more over the course of my life to knowing that God is working all things together for good, for the purposes of his will in my life, which actually turns out to be so much better than my own will for my life. So for me, that's the great hope that I'd want to focus on.